and welcome to the EMIC webinar. E-mental health solutions can be powerful tools for increasing access to quality mental health and well-being support. This is particularly true when they are developed and delivered in ways which are informed by those they seek to serve and recognize the complexity of the systems in which they are operating. In this webinar, we will share learning and experience from the Youth Flourishing in North Auckland Innovation Challenge, both from the perspective of the delivery partners, Ember Innovations and the Paihere Charitable Trust, and from that of members of the innovator cohort working on e-mental health solutions. My name is Gregor Henderson, and it's my pleasure to be your host for today's webinar. I'm a board member of EMIC, very proud to play that role, and I represent the UK in that role. Today, we'll be talking about the important topic of youth flourishing in North Auckland, e-mental health at the intersection of community-driven and systems-led innovation. Our panelists from Ember Innovation in New Zealand are pioneering new ways to improve mental health outcomes for young people and are here with us today to share the outcome of an exciting initiative, the Youth Flourishing in North Auckland Innovation Challenge. We also have with us one of the Innovation Challenge winners, Tim Reed, founder of Helmet, a technology company building products to support supporters, to share his insights. You'll hear from each of our panelists shortly, but first I have a few quick points to mention. Feel free to share your current location or area of interest in e-mental health. To do so, you can click on the 3 dots next to your name tag, choose Edit, add your country or location, and this allows you to connect with others who will share similar interests and geographies. If you have any questions for the panelists during the webinar, please feel free to post them in the chat box, and during the Q&A later in the session, I'll do my best to include as many of these questions as possible in our discussion. Lastly, today's webinar is being recorded, and the EMIC team will soon share the recording in the EMIC Knowledge Bank. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker of the day, Daryl Bishop, the Group Chief Executive of Ember Innovations. Daryl has held professional roles within the mental health and addiction sector for over 20 years and now leads Ember Innovations as Chief Executive Officer. Ember blends professional expertise and lived experience to offer a range of services and supports for anyone with mental health, addiction, or intellectual disability needs. It comprises Ember Innovation Services, Systems, and Kanyu Haimau, Community Housing. Sorry if I'm getting some of the pronunciations wrong. Daryl is committed to ensuring innovation is at the heart of everything that Ember does, and that Ember, the movement, drives systemic change within our sector. That means Aotearoa better responds to and understands mental health and addiction and intellectual disability. Daryl, it's great to see you and welcome to the webinar. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Gregor. Just before I share my screen, just a quick introduction. Ko Daryl Bishop Tukaingwa, Ko Ember Group CEO Tokamahi. Just really good to be on the webinar and really good to, well, I can't see any of you, but really good to be among old friends and colleagues. I'm going to speak very briefly today because I want to leave as much time as possible to Emily and also to Tim, because they're going to talk much more about the challenge. But I just want to give you a very, very brief context. And for that, I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. So just to give you some sense of when we talk about Ember the movement, which sounds very grand, Ember Innovations is part of the Ember Group, as Gregor said. When we formed the Ember Group from a merger of 2 long-standing NGOs 5 years ago, and when we formed the group, we set a very, very bold vision. And our vision that was we wanted an Aotearoa New Zealand where all people were supported to be who and what they want to be. And really crucially, a very sort of global vision that we wanted a society that better understands and responds to mental distress, addictions, and intellectual disability. When we did that, we kind of knew that we couldn't just deliver services. So as we set up Ember Korowai Takatini, which is the full group name, we wanted to look at what other things we needed to do other than deliver world-class mental health support services, that we could really sort of move that dial and change the way that New Zealand responded to mental health, addiction, and intellectual disability issues. So we had this idea that we needed to set a much bolder, strategic, bold horizon, and we needed to do more things than just deliver services. So we wanted to see more resilient communities. We wanted to see increased innovation. We wanted to be a catalyst for increased public and private investment. We wanted to really pare down what worked and what changed and drove systemic change and actual change in mental health and addiction. So we wanted to base that on outcomes of what works. We wanted to see more preventative work and an earlier and younger intervention. We were committed to the growth of Te Ao Māori in the sector, as well as the growth of lived experience at the center of co-design and co-production, which you'll see a lot of today. And we wanted to focus on systemic change and not on services. So to do that, we actually created 5 entities. We have the Ember Wellbeing Trust, which owns all of our assets, all of our portfolio, and all of our entities. We created a bold, exciting Ember Services, which consists of about 40 mental health and addiction and intellectual disability services across New Zealand, across New Zealand's North Island, with a real focus on lived experience. Over 60% of our staff have lived experience of service use, and we have a real focus on peer services, among other parts of that. We created a housing entity called Kainga Haumaru, where we're entering into the delivery of community housing. And we also created a systems entity where we own our database and we're building knowledge based on information and data. And then for the focus of today, we created Ember Innovations. Ember Innovations is where we want to not just promote innovation, not just promote the idea that there were new ideas that we wanted to be part of the sector, but we also wanted to directly support innovators to change the world. We really believe that all people in Aotearoa can have better mental well-being if we work together with a common purpose and harness our collective energy, resources, and talent to make lasting change. So we really want to support that idea that there are ideas out there that aren't currently part of the solution for people that we think we can support to be part of. To do that, we created a model with 4 PO. We want to support innovators and to support innovation. We want to connect innovators to each other, to research, and to us. We want to advocate for system change based on new ideas and innovation. And for the focus of today, we want to run a challenge process and challenge processes to propagate and nurture new ideas. And that's what we're going to talk about today. On the call from our team today are me, without the beard. You may not recognize me there. I grew a beard recently. Emily Preston is our innovation lead, and Samir Hussain is our relationship and engagement manager. So I'm going to duck out. I'll be back for the Q&A, and I'm going to hand over to Emily.
Let me introduce Emily Preston, who's the innovation lead for Ember Innovations. Emily has spent the past 2 decades working in social innovation, social enterprise, development, and non-profit capability building roles with a focus on education and well-being. She also holds governance and advisory roles within the mental health and well-being space. Emily loves to look at complex issues from different angles, listen to human stories and experiences behind the statistics, and explore what might be possible. She is endlessly curious and loves a good yarn, as well as a logic model or system map. Emily is passionate about ensuring the voices of those most impacted by challenges are central to the development of solutions. Emily, welcome, and looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Gregor. I'll just share my screen for a second. Okay, so thank you, Daryl, for setting the context for my piece. My job here is to bring some of that bigger picture stuff to life by walking you through a particular project. And that project is the Youth Flourishing in North Auckland Challenge, which was really our first kind of big piece of work in that challenge space that Daryl introduced. So this is a space with many, many buzzwords, which are sort of listed at the top of this slide. It was a very community-driven project. So we worked in partnership with some amazing delivery partners, so Te Ako Manaki and the Paihere Charitable Trust, who unfortunately can't be with us today, but also with communities across North Auckland. It's a systems level project. We were looking at those interconnections between different pieces of the puzzle, different people doing different things, and trying to understand how we can collaborate to create greater impact. And it was a place-based project, so we were working in a specific area. And that area and that approach was really about getting some clarity. This challenge-led innovation approach really at its heart is just about having a clear call to action and mobilizing people and resources around it. So it was really important that we took this very broad, holistic space of mental health and well-being and put some edges around it so we could create some clarity. And the way we did that was through deciding on a group, deciding on a region, and this slide kind of talks you through how we did that. So we focused on young people. There's a high increasing rate of mental health challenges amongst younger New Zealanders. I think that's pretty well documented. There's a lot of research around that, so pretty clear area of need. We wanted to focus on a region because this allows us to really deeply understand the reality in that region. So the need, sure, but also the opportunity. What's already working well? What can we build on that's already happening within that existing system? And this region, the North Auckland region, we chose for a number of reasons, partly through need, partly through opportunity. So this is a really broad, diverse region. We went from the Harbour Bridge all the way up to Wellsford, and that includes urban, regional and quite rural communities, communities which have unmet needs and some which seem like they have a lot going for them on the surface. We also had some strong relationships in those communities, particularly through those partners that I mentioned earlier. So Te Ako Manaki and the Paihere Charitable Trust brought a huge amount of expertise and relationships in those areas too. Another really important element was that there was a desire within these communities to actually work with us, and we tested that. We went in not expecting that we necessarily would continue, but exploring whether there was a role for us, which was really important. And with all good social innovation type projects, you can fit it into diamonds. So we've done that here. So this first challenge, we started off with an identified need, as I've mentioned, some relationships, and a strong commitment within Ember Innovations and within the team to do what we wanted, what the community wanted us to do in a way that was going to create positive impact. And that first diamond is looking at how we really got under the skin of that challenge and opportunity. So this was a kind of co-design discovery process, I suppose. We spoke with young people, with whānau and family, with other adults in their lives to understand what was going on for them, what was already working, what was helping them to flourish, what was getting in the way and what was difficult. And through that, working with our co-designers, we were able to define 3 focus areas and also a set of selection criteria, which they felt would be important if an innovation or an innovator were to have positive impact in this context. That call to action is what we used for our second diamond, which was going out and looking at who has the most potential to create positive impact in this specific context. So our co-designers scored all those people who applied to be a part of it, and we ended up with a wonderful cohort and also some amazing coaches who were recruited to kind of support those teams where they were at and in their particular kind of solution that they were developing. So when we had our cohort, that final diamond is looking at how we actually supported them to take the next step on their innovation development journey. So that again was around knowledge, skills, connections, and other assets. What can we mobilize to create impact? And then at the end of that third diamond, we're not dropping people, we're not done, but that was the end of our challenge process. But those innovators that we were working with, largely we're continuing to support outside of this challenge process through our support and connections, and also through some grant funding. And obviously behind the scenes, those beautiful diamonds turn into a wiggly path, which is generally the case. I'm not going to go into any detail here, but you'll be able to see them in the slides after this if you'd like to. Focusing in on innovator support and what we did with that cohort of 9 innovators, because I think that's probably the most relevant piece for people on this call. There was quite a broad and holistic curriculum that we put together which had elements of a kind of traditional accelerator, but also some quite different pieces. So the way that we supported innovators had to kind of enable us to deliver those sorts of content and that sort of support as well. So we had 4 different mechanisms that we used for this. Peer support was really important. We were looking to create collaboration rather than competition, and we built relationships or created space for those relationships to really flourish and strengthen within the cohort. And that was something that became incredibly important over time, as people who were slightly later in their journey were able to share their expertise with people who were very early stage. We had a beautiful sense of community that developed there. Coaches are obviously a really key element. Each team had a coach who walked alongside them throughout, and those coaches were the usual sorts of coaches you'd expect, your kind of business startup strategy people, but also people who were maybe slightly different than usual. So we had psychologists, we had impact specialists, we had systems thinkers, and although each team had their own coach, they were also able to tap into the other coaches within the cohort. Mentors and experts, we were so privileged to have such amazing networks of people who put their hands up to support us in their areas of expertise. And in this case, that included things like policy, youth-informed practice, lived experience leadership, storytelling for impact, stigma reduction, impact measurement, and funding impact-first organisations, and probably more that I haven't mentioned there. That sort of programme we developed alongside the coaches and the cohort as we understood more about where their needs might be. So that was a real kind of exciting moving feast. And of course, the wider community, I've listed them last, but actually they were really important all the way through. So we deliberately held events with the innovators at Orewa College in the evening so that community members could come along, see what was happening, listen to where progress was being made and be part of those stories, and also offer what they wanted to offer to support. So we had testers, advisors, doers, all sorts of supporters, people who just came along to kind of give them some moral support, and that was a really important part of the project as well. And this is really the kind of overall thinking behind it. So this is kind of an impact model that we developed over the course of the project. Starting at the top, this is our very high level focus area, which came from kind of lit reviews and information reviews and looking at the research. We know that there was a need in terms of young people and mental health. Underneath, we're looking more at how we wanted to approach that. So we chose to look at flourishing, which is this very kind of broad, holistic idea of what that means. We didn't want to get too narrow. We wanted it to be about how might young people experience positive mental well-being and a sense of flourishing more often and more consistently. And we've also put up there our strong belief and foundational belief that local community-driven solutions are more likely to be effective when we're addressing complex systemic challenges, and that we wanted to place community voice, resources and priorities at the heart of our work. The next layer down is largely what came out of that discovery process. So innovation has a potential to create real positive impact on youth mental well-being in this community. Great, that's the first thing we tested. Was there a space for us to do something in this community or not? And then those 3 impact areas that I referenced earlier are these ones here. So we were looking at more preventative care and early intervention. We were looking at supporting the supporters, and we were looking at joining things up and removing gaps, because we had pockets of really incredible work being done, but as often is the case, there were gaps in between that people were falling through. And in terms of our contribution and what we were directly impacting on, those are those 6 at the bottom. So the top 3 in there are things which are a bit easier to affect and also to measure. So we were finding, identifying and catalysing the innovators who are most likely to create impact in this context. We were building capability and confidence. We were connecting them with skills, tools and resources. And then that bottom 3 are more about ways of working. So centering community and youth voice, driving collaboration, partnership and systems mentioned, and then looking at creating a greater understanding of need. And very quickly, before I hand over to Tim, here's an idea of who the innovators were who were part of this. So a real range of ideas through to quite established organisations, some of them e-mental health, some of them not. Logged in living is interesting because they're actually not an e-mental health solution, but they're looking at reducing social media harm. Got some community-based organizations, networks, mentoring organizations, Overcome, who I believe have talked to you guys in the past. So they use virtual reality. They started off addressing phobias, and they were working with us to actually develop a solution to support young people to quit vaping. Shore Junction is a youth innovation hub who were actually looking at the opportunities around a Discord server that they'd launched during COVID. And Helmet, I won't say too much about, because in a moment we're going to hand it over to Tim, who is the founder and leader there, and will be able to tell you more. And it looks like that's probably quite enough for me.
Emily, thank you. That was great. Very, very comprehensive. Really, really well paced. So thank you very much for that. Great. Really good. Okay, let's move on to our third and final speaker before we get into the panel and then the Q&A with you, our audience. I'd like to introduce Tim Reed. Tim is the founder of Helmet, a technology company building products to support the supporters. Helmet was built on the belief that it's those who exist around an individual already who have the greatest motivation and capability to make a difference in the lives of those with mental health or well-being distress, if they were just empowered to do so. Previously a physiotherapist, a world-class master chef, and an author, Tim uses his lessons learned from lived experience to shape the development of Helmet and communicate as a public speaker, empowering everyone to play their part in the current battle in mental health. Tim, looking forward to hearing from you and to the range of ingredients you share with us to make a fantastic and delectable dish. Tim, over to you.
Thanks so much, Gregor, and hi, everyone. A real honour to be speaking to you all today. Helmet, as Gregor just said, was built out of the thinking that it's the people around an individual in distress who have the greatest motivation, and if they were just empowered to do so, the greatest opportunity for impact and difference making in the lives of those facing mental health or wellbeing distress. And this idea and hypothesis has come off the journey of about 2 years of innovation, quietly in the background, starting with just myself, leaving my day job as a chef, and just really feeling called to make an impact in the world of mental health. But from there, have met with the wonderful people from Ember, EMIC as a member. It's yeah, a real privilege to be sharing to you all. But the journey really started off the back of my own lived experience. So struggling with depression through my early 20s, and then working in high-class, world-class restaurants across the world, seeing the impact performance-based anxiety in particular had on my life and the lives of the people I worked around with, and then the loss of a dear friend due to suicide really was the catalyst to get into this space. And so I entered it with almost two conditions to myself, and that was I wanted to make a global difference, and I wanted to be a for-purpose business. In my previous life as a physiotherapist, saw the fragility of relying on government funding for innovation, for treatment, for work. And so really wanted to be able to provide myself with provide the company, I should say, sorry, with a financially sustainable model that we could work from and innovate from. I met Ember quite early on in the piece, and one of the big challenges you face as an innovator within mental health is finding your place within a severely fragmented system. Coming from allied health and physiotherapy, where you knew the onboarding process, I guess, of your patients, and you knew where to send people for different circumstances. Within a severely fragmented system, it's very difficult to know where to place your innovation, who to connect with. And Ember have been fantastic from day dot, but the idea of when the challenge came along to increase our partnership with Ember was really attractive for us. And also, I'm sure you can imagine, when you're working in any form of innovation space, the opportunity to try and access money is a real key thought and idea and driver to connect with potential partners. And so being a part of the challenge late last year was very attractive, and which the reason for which we applied. When we came into the challenge, we had a hypothesis on the way we could make impact, being through the supporters of supporters. But we're really quite unsure about our product and the monetization model, and know those two had to be developed in unison. We couldn't rely on going from one, get product sorted and then try and figure out monetization, or vice versa. We had to develop the two. And so we really focused for the few months that we were part of the challenge on trying to come out from the end of it with a clear idea of what our product would be and how we would monetize that. And one of the core topics for today is understanding that we all exist within a network, that this is a cooperation, not a competition. And it was fantastic to be able to share with other innovators, although doing many different things, and seeing the similar problems that existed. And so the key learning we got out of it was the opportunity to help others monetize. And so we're developing an app where we will look to improve the capabilities of the supporters around an individual in distress. And the product concept is now that we will give people a series of modules, the modules being these capability development pieces that provide people with features, tools, services, whatever it may be, to help them improve in their specific context. But as we know, individuals struggle with a variety of contexts, and no two people are the same. And so we at Helmet will never be able to innovate to a point where we can fully provide customized support to each and every person across the globe. So we actually need to work in cooperation. But one of the challenges across the sector is the inability to monetize based on their services, tools, ideas. And so if we can provide a platform on which they can do that, we're able to find out what people most need and provide them a sustainable financial opportunity for the service providers. Then there's a lot of sense in that. And so we have left the challenge as of December 2023, and just quietly have stolen one of the coaches, not actually my coach, but stole one of the coaches to be my co-founder. He's come on board as head of product, and we're developing product now in the background whilst running a program, an MVP email-based program to help people better support those in their lives through mental health distress. But the whole product in the background and the hypothesis we're testing is this marketplace that we can provide others an opportunity to be financially sustainable themselves. A massive opportunity, a pleasure to be working with Ember, and could not have done it without them. One of the more difficult pieces in starting an organization is just finding your feet in an industry. And when you're starting out, innovation is high risk. And I understand the sector we are in, we cannot afford too much risk. But without risk, we won't get innovation. And so it's been an absolute pleasure to partner with Ember, to be able to leverage their reputation and their connections, and be able to go to the likes of Emily Cambrian when he was here, and even Daryl, who introduced me to Neil, to be able to leverage the reputation and connections they have to help us fit within the ecosystem of health. Yeah, and so that's us at Helmet. I look forward to fielding any questions, but yeah, that was my experience from going through the challenge.
Tim, thank you. That was great. And I love some of the things that you were saying, and I'll come back to some of those in the Q&A. But I really think one of the take-home messages is that we are all connected in a network if we care about what we're doing. And that notion of sharing and some of the capability building modules that you do, that's just absolutely fantastic. Great. Okay, I'm joined by Daryl and Emily. We're going to have a little bit of a panel discussion. And so it's just a reminder for the audience out there to post your questions into the chat. I'd like to explore a few questions in the next 15 or so minutes. So the first one, I think, Emily, I'd quite like you to take this one, and it's how might e-mental health solutions and other innovative approaches to mental health and well-being work together to create greater positive impact?
Thanks, Gregor. So I think this is primarily about acknowledging the kind of complex, interrelated space that we occupy when we're trying to do mental health and well-being innovation, and the opportunities and challenges that come from that, because nobody can do it all, but we can all do part of it. So actually understanding who's out there and who's doing what is a really great starting point. I feel like, you know, e-mental health solutions have some really amazing, unique value around the scale and reach and potentially accessibility and anonymity, and things which are really hard to find through other traditional kind of face-to-face methods. So that gives you a really unique opportunity to play a role that others can't. And that can range from, you know, we see a lot of situations where there's referrals, sort of relationships between different sorts of solutions or different sort of service providers. There's opportunities to provide support to people who are maybe on a wait list or can't access more traditional services. But actually, increasingly, there's e-mental health services which are around actually empowering people to find the support they need. You know, kind of understanding how to have a conversation with your GP if that's what you need to do, and go in feeling equipped and able to actually talk about what you need. And I keep thinking about, there's a conversation I had with ThinkLadder around how their solution is actually being used alongside talk therapy as almost like a translator when you have young people who are struggling to engage with a therapist and actually have a conversation. It can be a really useful tool for breaking down barriers in that sort of situation. So I think there's many creative ways that it can be done, and it kind of depends on the context, but being open to those possibilities is the start.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I'm maybe I'll throw in a supplementary to that, and Daryl and Tim, please come in. When you're working in a system, obviously you're encouraging everybody to partnership and work together. What do you do with some of the innovators or some of the people in the digital mental health world who may not quite be ready to collaborate and build their models or develop their models based on a competitive industry rather than sharing? How do you encourage them to come into the tent that you're creating, which is, you know, a great tent? Daryl, do you want to come in there? I can't, for the life of me, think that everybody comes willing to share everything they've got.
Well, I think there's some natural reluctance when people are seeing themselves in a competitive space. I definitely see that. What I would reflect on, I think the best moments of the challenge for me watching it was the final wrap up on a stage in a secondary school in North Auckland, where all of the innovators came on the table on the panel together, and with the facilitator they had a discussion, and you could hear from that discussion that everybody had benefited in some way. Everybody had gained something. Everybody had added something to their competitive edge. And I think if we can show more people that result, I think at the front end you'll get more people willing to come and share their ideas, because there's plenty of space. In New Zealand, every year 1.2 million people need some sort of support. I'm not talking about the worried well, I'm talking about people who need an intervention to support them with their mental distress or their addiction or something in their life that is causing problems which are affecting them greatly. At best, all of our actions in primary, secondary and tertiary care will service about 400,000 people in New Zealand. At best, that's capacity. So 800,000 people need support. So there's plenty of room for everybody. There's plenty of room for new ideas. And we're seeing this. And we really believe that these ideas will be better if people share their knowledge, share their understanding and share their ideas. And that means better in terms of efficacy, but also better commercially. So you've got so much to learn. And I think all of our innovators get that. And I think we've started something here which we'll see more of that sharing.
I mean, honestly, that's great. And I love the way you use the example of providers together, talking to the communities they serve and seeing the benefit. And, you know, people like a range of options. Yes, if it's improving access, let's have a range of options. I think there are some technical challenges in terms of interoperability and handing on from one service to another, but we may come on to that. Let me move to the next one, which was around community, as we're working on the role of the community. What is the role of community and lived experience voices in the development and delivery of mental health solutions? Daryl, you're up just now. Can you take that one first, and then
sure. I mean,
it's
a pretty easy question to answer. I mean, I genuinely feel, whether it's mental health or any mental health intervention, if you want it to work, you have to involve the people, as in the community, but people, particularly people with lived experience, in the design, the co-production, the evaluation. People have to be involved from the start. I've been working in mental health. I know I look really young, but I've been working in mental health for 30 years. And in 30 years, the things that I've seen work are things which have involved people who are going to use those services, whether they be IRL services or digital services or mental health or whatever. They've involved them from the earliest possible point. They've involved them in idea generation, in design, in production, and in evaluation. And I will now not do anything as the Group CEO of a very large organization. I will not do anything that does not genuinely and authentically involve the voice of lived experience and the voice of the community we're trying to serve from the outset, because I don't want to fail, Gregor. I'm it's not just about some grandiose idea that lived experience is. I want things to work, and I want things to help people. And the only thing that helps people, in my experience, are things which are built from lived experience, from user experience, and then you bring all the technical expertise to the table to try and make it happen.
Absolutely perfect. Absolutely. And I think one of the things that's really clear is the principles by which you and Ember work to that. And also, and I know you do this, it's keeping up to date with lived experience and community voices, because things change. We're in a very rapidly changing environment and era. Things happen that are beyond our control, and listening to those voices, because whenever we have a product, that product never stays static.
No, absolutely. And look, the one thing I'm always wary of is when, and the first conversation I ever had with Tim was one of those conversations where I always say, be really wary if you think you've got the solution, because you probably haven't. You need to talk to more people. You need to share your ideas, and you need to learn from people who are going to use your thing. And I think Tim has done that really well in terms of taking ideas from people who are going to use Helmet and use his idea and join his community. And I think you have to constantly refresh how you think about that and how you think about your community. And we do that all the time. And we're probably an organization that is really, really committed to that. But I think more and more organizations and more initiatives are, because we want things to work. That's why. I mean, if you're interested in efficacy, then you have to have a constant reminder of who's going to use it and what they want. So yeah, it's
really good. I'll come on to some of the dilemmas in terms of research and proving efficacy to those that may have a slightly more clinical view of the world in terms of commissioning. But we'll come on to that in a minute. Tim, I'm desperate to come to you, but Emily, I've got a question that I'm going to throw into you. And it's, what's the potential of mental health solutions to tackle the impact themes of joining the dots? Now, it's really great to involve people, but how, when you're in a system, say like North Auckland, how do you connect the pieces of the system and keep them connected in a digital world?
Yeah, it's a great question. And obviously, it was one of our impact themes. So we saw a lot of people applying with that sort of impact goal. I think in terms of mental health solutions, there's a real advantage in terms of, data and having things which are digital and electronic, kind of having that interoperability kind of built into what you're doing is simple, I suppose, than it can be in real life. It is still a challenge, because having the right data is really hard, and having people sharing data is probably harder, and making systems work together is really hard. So this is not to kind of downplay any of that, but I do feel like it's an area where e-mental health has the ability to build real leaders and kind of demonstrate how this is possible.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you. Tim, let me come to you.
Yeah.
I'm really struck by the innovation model and the sharing you were talking about. How just as clearly as you can, it's a complex, but how might we, community of those of us in digital health, digital mental health more broadly, how might we best support e-mental health innovators to develop solutions that are safe, impactful, scalable, and sustainable? You gave a little remark at the beginning about the fragility of government funding and the kind of phases they go through sometimes, in my experience, mostly in the UK, of innovating with one thing, but not necessarily staying the course, or grabbing onto the next stage of innovation, whether it is AR or VR, and really not looking at some of the systemic challenges behind that or the lived experience. It feels like the advances in technology seem to be more attractive than a deep process of innovation. So how do we support e-mental health innovators to develop in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it comes back to a similar theme, right? Like Daryl's statement around he will not develop without the lived experience, without not at the center. Sorry, is like product design 101. And if we think about it from a tech perspective, be it mental health, be it Airbnb, Uber Eats, whatever it might be, they all started by speaking to their users. But as an innovator, especially coming from a place of lived experience, it's very difficult to find groups of users. That's a massive challenge, first and foremost. And so being willing to partner with innovators, de-risking is a massive piece. I understand some of the asks I present to Daryl are pretty audacious, and he has the good sense to humor me at times and tell me off at others. But it's this cooperative de-risking of the innovation with the user at the center, and ultimately trying to provide them the help that they need. And that's probably the big driver for me as someone who's come out of lived experience. I know the gaps I've lived through, but as we've all pointed out, the gaps move, they change along with innovation. But there's populations there who will know the gaps I have fallen through because they've fallen through them themselves. And it's such a wide sector. Yeah, and so I guess it keeps coming back to we need access to people to be able to start testing our hypotheses in a safe way. A lot of these bigger organizations have wonderful safety, privacy, all these other things going on. And if we can join alongside them and look to provide help in a new and novel way supervised by them, then that's a wonderful thing for innovation.
Good. And coming to the monetization question, you mentioned that a number of times, and I think government funding behind innovation is absolutely crucial. And you only have to read some of the more modern, up-to-date economists who are saying, government is usually at the forefront. The issue then becomes when you're a competitive market, as you know, and sometimes the social impact value doesn't get the airplay I think sometimes it needs. How do we encourage the field to move towards monetization where you can see it's not just about pound, shilling, and pence, but it's about return on investment in terms of social impact? Is that something that you are discussing in some of your forums and with your partners?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the opportunity that we have working in the mental health space opens up a number of monetization opportunities. I keep coming back to, because my world is essentially venture capital or venture rate startup, and I work alongside fintech and all these other opportunities where they only have venture capital to access. whereas we're doing this ethical good in the community. And so there's access to philanthropic funds, there's government grants, there's all these things that if we just structure ourselves legally right, we can access all of that. So there's actually wonderful opportunity in tackling a good thing for society. But it's hard. Yeah, I think in New Zealand, you just look at the change in government and the decrease in funding available across all sectors, and the massive impact that has had on even established businesses that have been around for 5, 6, 7 years, and the removal of funding there to show kind of or to back up my motivation not to rely on government funding. And so we've worked really hard to try and improve in this area. And ultimately that comes back to we need to provide enough good to our users in order for them to see value in paying for it. In saying that, our app will be freemium. We fully understand that mental health distress affects the lower socioeconomic parts of our communities greater. And so ethically, there needs to be the understanding of that. And so you can't just force people to pay if you want to have global impact, but you need to also balance that with the way to try and be financially sustainable in the long term. And so that's where our ability to provide value over and above other solutions tries to come into it.
That's good, Darryl. Yeah, of course.
Just add something there, Gregor. So this is really important to us. So just a really straightforward statement. There isn't enough investment from government, from non-government, from philanthropy, from corporates into mental health and addiction. There just isn't. So there's not enough money. And we're really aware of that. And we want our organization, Ember Innovations, to work on a variety of levels to try and tackle that issue. So one level you're hearing about today is we want to work however we can with innovators to help them get money that is available. So that involves helping them with their pitch, helping them with their product, connecting them directly to funders. And at times, we will work directly with them to fundraise. So we'll do whatever it takes to help them go for available money. But that's half of our job. And I think organizations like Ember Innovations, we're really committed also to advocating for increased funding. So we want to showcase the work in things like the challenge and the work of our innovators. And we want to showcase that to funders because there's a fear in philanthropic funding, particularly in corporate funding, about funding things in mental health that don't work. So we want to add our expertise, our reputation, our integrity, and our ability to showcase what works to allow funders or to support funders to move more money into mental, because there's a willingness, there's a notion, but there's a fear. And there's also this idea that maybe they shouldn't fund things that government should be funding. So we want to act as a conduit and as a supporter to grease that tube and allow more money to come to people who want to change the world, like Tim. Now, we understand that we have to do that at both levels, and that's what we're committed to doing. We're going to advocate and we're going to support. We're going to do both. And that's our model in essence, really, around money.
That's a great pillar, that advocacy one, Darryl. That's fantastic. Lynn has come in and saying embedding outcome-based design in applications and programming is essential in monetization strategies. Thanks, Lynn. Let's go to Q&A with the audience. Sorry, I've taken a while to get there. I see one question in the Q&A, so please add anything into the chat or the Q&A. So I'm going to read out the question, and panelists, anybody that wants to take this, please do. Any work or research done around neurodiversity, since we're seeing an increasing numbers of younger population who are self-diagnosed or who are diagnosed with neurodiversity? So any thoughts around neurodiversity? Who's going to come in?
I can. So my co-founder, the reason he joined, and a broad number of the population with a large affinity for helmet already are parents of teenagers going through mental health distress or wellbeing distress or neurodiverse children. And so that is my co-founder. His 15-year-old son has ADHD and the struggles of trying to parent and support him through his journey. We are looking to partner with places who already have the curriculum in place, and then turn it into the type of modules and services that would benefit Helmet. It's my understanding from this moment that a lot of this comes down to an accessibility problem rather than a knowledge-based problem. And that could be foolish of me saying that, but that's my understanding right now.
Okay, great. Darryl, Emily?
I could probably add a little bit of cynicism from my experience of mental. I mean, I think the issue is how we fund generally, and how we fund mental health services excludes people, both in terms of neurodiversity, but also in terms of issues that fall between mental health and intellectual disability, like fetal alcohol syndrome and things like that. We fund based on disease. We're not very good at funding things to respond to how people are. It's just a problem with the funding. What we've tried to commit to in another part of our work, we also fund some research grants, and we've particularly focused on research in these areas. We're particularly interested in areas that aren't currently met well by the sector, because what we find is, of course, people with neurodiverse struggles, or where their struggles are part of neurodiversity is part of the issue, end up in system and services anyway, because they end up with mental health issues and they end up needing support, but the system doesn't respond to them very well. We think e-mental health and digital responses particularly have a good opportunity to respond better than traditional mental health services. And we're really interested in how things like AI and things like, broader sort of digital responses can do that, because we think there's a really good idea how that's going to work. And I know that we're joining, and Vanessa's shared a link to a whole lot of stuff on the chat there. We think there's a body of research developing there, and we think society needs to think better about how we respond to the needs. I think it's an area of awareness that's growing, thankfully. I think it's long overdue. And I do think that e-mental health has a particular place, and we will continue to fund research in that area.
Good, and I think that whole notion of how we characterize and how we talk about mental health challenges, Tim, you said at the beginning, it's about the supporters around a person are absolutely key, and we need to somehow start, and I know you'll be doing work around this, move away from that industrialized clinical model of what ails you, what's the name of that, do we give it a diagnosis, and then there's a set form of treatment responses. And we are so beyond that now in terms of our human understanding. And I do think that what we really want to see, and you are at the forefront of this, is e-mental health solutions embracing those challenges, but coming up with the right answers to how the challenges of those limiting diagnostic clinical models have shown. I'm going to go to a question from Camilla. In the context of expanding e-mental health services, how do you envision integrating cultural responsiveness into the development of e-mental health platforms and programs to better serve diverse populations? Thanks, Camilla.
I can have a crack at that one.
Sure.
So I think this to me sits in the area of lived experience as well. And the question is, which voices are you hearing, and which perspectives are involved in the development at the start and ongoing of services? So I think to be truly cultural responsive, we need to make sure that the voices of people from the cultural background that you are referring to are involved in an initial and ongoing basis, and doing that in a way that's really authentic and really upholds the manner of everybody involved is the simple yet difficult answer that I would give to that.
Great, thank you, Emily. Anybody else? I've got another offering in the Q&A, but anybody else want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think I wish I could have answered that first question again, because for us it sits under the same blanket, right? Our approach at Helmet is to try and give voice to those who have lived experience in these other areas or expertise. I think a big part of working in the mental health industry is having the humility to know your experience and the limits of that. And if you can provide a voice to others who have greater understanding and experience in the areas you do not. And so that's where I was going with the services that are already out there with neurodiversity, but it's the same in for cultural Māori-Pacifica here in New Zealand, the myriad of others and the thousands, millions of others across the world, where Tim Reid, a white European 34-year-old living in Grey Lynn in Auckland, will not have the expertise from their lived experience. And so it's so vital to bring them into the conversation, sorry, as Emily has pointed out.
Yeah, well said, Tim.
The only thing I just add there is that I think anybody who's operated on the world stage and seen the most innovative things that have happened in recent years have often come from Indigenous communities around the world. Anil, who's on this call, and I have worked closely with Laurie Idlott in northern Canada with the Nunavut communities, and the innovation that they've driven to reach their populations and to develop. I mean, I think. You have to be blind not to realize that Indigenous populations solved issues first and innovatively, and to not incorporate those would be, again, foolish, really. So yeah, we've got that at the center of what we do always.
Yeah, great, really, really good. We've got an offer from Jane Maloney, who is asking us and the audience, are we aware of Dr. Julian King's value for investment evaluation methodology? Jane, I'm not. If you've got any links you want to post in the chat, would be great. Jane says it's a very useful approach for defining value from a number of perspectives, especially people with lived experience. Okay, we've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to open up to one more Q&A or one more offering in the chat. But whilst I do that, can I just go to Emily quickly, then Daryl, then Tim? One sentence that you'd like to share before we close off the webinar about the importance of what we've been talking about, particularly enabling youth to flourish. Emily.
Oh, that's a big one to drop on me first. One sentence. I guess if we're talking about young people flourishing, the key thing I would say is young people know what's getting in the way and what's helpful, and we don't do a great job of not just listening to them, but actually doing stuff that lines up with what they need. So not just listening, but also enabling young people to be really involved in design and decision making is a pretty simple but important part of it.
Great. Daryl?
I'd leave people with a thing that I've said a lot recently, and there's a sentence at the end of this, I promise, but just as context, I think what we're going through at the moment is very similar to what we went through in the 80s and 90s when the institutions closed. And when the institutions closed, people were flooded into communities without support, without resource, and there was lots of unmet need. And what happened then is a community of caring, supportive people responded and developed services to support people. What we need now is a community of innovators, digitally and non-digitally, to respond to unmet need, because we have a huge amount of unmet need. And I would implore people to think about being a part of not just their own solution, but a part of a community of innovation to solve the big, nasty, horrible issues that we're trying to solve as a society, whether it be in Aotearoa, in the UK, in Brazil, or wherever people are. Join a community of innovation. Let's solve these problems together.
Fantastic. And Tim, last word to you before I close.
Yeah, mine would be let's keep talking. And it's an oversimplification of everything that we've just said, right? To users, to other innovators, to existing people working in large service providers like Ember. Let's all just keep talking. Be humble enough to admit where our holes are, because there's holes, as Daryl's just pointed out, and to try and work together. So let's just keep talking.
Great. Well, thank you. I would like to say a huge thank you to each of our panelists, Emily, Tim, Daryl, for contributing so much to our discussions today. That's it. It's been a great pleasure having you with us. and we look forward to seeing you at our future webinars. Thank you very much, and goodbye.